Welcome to the Health System CIO show. I'm your host, founder, and editor Anthony Guerra. On today's episode, I'll be speaking with Craig Richardville, Senior Vice President and Chief Digital and Information Officer with UF Health. Craig, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Anthony, for having me.
All right, it's good to see you. It's been a while, but I love seeing you at the shows and stuff. We talk about lifting and wrestling and all that kind of stuff, and you got to stay active, right? When you're sitting at a computer a lot of the day. So good to see you. Craig, you want to start off? It's kind of interesting about your organization and your role. Now, I believe your role is a new role at the organization. You were there for a little bit before you sort of moved into this role. Perhaps getting ready for it, sort of getting warmed up. But tell me about the evolution of your time at UF Health and then the role.
Yeah, well, first of all, UF Health, is one of the nation's most comprehensive academic health systems. It integrates patient care, research, and education. We have a statewide footprint. We have hospitals, practices, colleges, institutes, and growing network of partnerships and affiliations. The Chief Digital and Information Officer, as you indicated, is a new role. So traditionally, it was a CIO role, and creating the Chief Digital Information Officer aligns it with where our future is going to be. So it takes technology, digital strategy, data analytics, AI, cyber, and brings all that together under a common governance structure. And that helps us to advance education, research, and patient care. So it's not just about running IT, which is kind of what a CIO does. It is ensuring all the digital investments that it creates value for our patients, for our clinicians, our researchers, students, the organization, and the communities that we serve.
All right, very good. Was this sort of presented to you, or did you have a lot to do with the crafting of the role and the governance? Was it more of a, here's what we'd like you to do or take on, and you come back and say, well, here's the structure I think would work if you want me to do these things. Here's what I think we need to move to. So was it presented to you, or did you have a lot to do with forming it?
I would say it's a combination of both. So historically, I have had the chief digital and information officer role, or in some cases, the digital and information are reversed. And it coming into this organization, part of it was to assess what was happening at UF Health, and then also to help create what part of the future would look like with the rest of the senior team. So, in putting that position together and sunsetting the previous positions, that really allows us to start with a fresh start of moving forward.
Well, tell me more about sunsetting previous positions. And do you have sort of your C-suite VP level IT team in place? Are there open roles where you need to fill? And, there's a million titles you could come up with, but at a basic level, you got your CMIO, your CNIO. I know you've had all these positions working for you in the past, CISO, a CTO. Like you could go on and on. You could probably add another three or four more around data and
Yeah,
analytics or
right.
infrastructure. It all depends how many of those you want to bring up from director to like a VP level. You're always going to have somebody doing those things, but it's what's the level, and that usually has a lot to do with the size of the organization. But what's going on with all that?
Yeah, that when you look at it, they're really you can't copy and paste from one organization to the other. They're all unique. They're all unique with their culture, with expectations, accountability, and that's one of the biggest challenges when you create a new position such as this is the old position has certain expectations. The new position, you are creating new expectations, and that is not only just what is expected of you and of your team, but also is what we expect from the partnerships and the relationships that we have. So when you start to move forward and start creating that new position, it really is a design that helps us. It's a continuing evolution, I guess is probably the best way to say it. So I've taken a lot of the team members that have been here, elevated them to positions that they have earned, created new structures up underneath, and we're still going through that evolution. I've got one position that is being filled as we speak, and I have maybe two more that are going to be created in the future. But it all depends on how fast we can evolve, how fast we can get our foundation systems in place, and truly position us for a lot of the newer technologies that are coming down the road.
When you think about positions and crafting new positions, even existing positions, um, I was wondering about overlap in areas of responsibility. So, I mean, things seem to work best when people understand what they're going to be doing, and there's not a tremendous amount of overlap in the sense that, well, I thought I'm working on that. Why are you working on that? I'm thinking of the Venn diagram where you got a little overlap with the two circles. That's probably inevitable that there is some overlap, but you want clarity. In my opinion, right? In general, you don't want too much overlap. So is that something you think about as you're trying to create positions and you're working sometimes with existing people? So you're saying this individual I have would be really good at this role if I craft it this way, which means they're going to get this piece of work, which means it might not be in this other role that traditionally would have that piece of work. So sometimes you're working with individuals and the talent base you have and molding to, it's like a football coach. Some of them come in and they say, I'm implementing my system, but some of the better ones say, I'm going to work with the talent I have. I might have to go from a 3-4 to a 4-3 or whatever. So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I am going with the talent that I have. Great people, and I'm all about people first, but I'm also about growing and developing people. So when it comes to strict lines of responsibility, there is a certain level of accountability that each position or each role has, but there's also intentional overlap. And first and foremost, I want to make sure people can talk all the language of all the different parts of technology. So as they grow and develop over the years, they would have the opportunity to either move, horizontal or vertical, and sit in this seat one day if they have the exposure to a lot of the other things that are happening. So when you see my meetings, they're mostly focused on kind of the team coming together or subsets of the team, 3 or 4 leaders together or the group of leaders. And then obviously you have some one-on-ones with them to talk about things that are specific for them. Most of that is about growth and development for them individually, around their, the executive presence and some of the accountability that's in place and performance metrics and how they roadmap and creating a vision for the future and the culture, et cetera. And then there's the team meetings and the sub teams. And to me, those are the most important because it allows people to step out of their current responsibilities that they have and to learn about some of the different areas. And as you know, when you have different people with different lenses and different backgrounds, being part and providing input to what you're trying to develop, that gives you a lot more options than you would have with just a single lens.
Yep, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about coaching and developing people, which is obviously such a huge part. It should be a huge part of what you're doing.
Yeah.
I'm almost positive that it isn't always. Um, right? There are individuals who don't do that. They may be very good at managing up. They may be good at getting the work done, but they may not be as good as focusing on growing, developing, and sort of continuity in the sense that if anybody leaves, we're prepared. We people around them are prepped, people under them are prepped. So, uh, do you have a philosophy around that sort of coaching and mentoring? I suppose it's a combination of what I see you doing, what I think your strengths are, where I think you could flourish, or you could even, some people say, I want you to work on your weaknesses. That's a total philosophical difference. You could say, listen, you're good at these things, and I want you to develop your strengths. Another point of view is I want you to work on your weaknesses. And I don't think either one's completely right or wrong. But what are your thoughts around the way you want to coach and mentor with the organization in mind?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to practice what you preach. And so for me, I'm always a student. I'm always learning, whether that's learning on my own, whether that's learning from others, whether just observing what's happening in a situation and say, I really want to mimic that behavior, or I don't want to mimic that behavior. We kind of learn, what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And so for me, as you kind of mature through your career, at some point you start to become more of a teacher as well. And I like to see it as at this point where I'm more of a professional parent. So, for those of us that are lucky enough to have children, I want my children to strive and be better than I am. And so, as on the professional side, I want my team members to strive and be better than I am one day. So over my career, I've got, I think the number's around 12 different people who used to work with me that are now chief information officers, digital officers, CDIOs, et cetera. And that to me is probably part of my gift is to be able to give back to the community, the industry, is new leaders that have great capabilities. And that's what I want to do here. That's why that exposure is important for me. I like people to understand what their weaknesses are, not necessarily say you always have to kind of strengthen your weaknesses, just understand it. And maybe at certain things, you just have to step out and let somebody else take over for you. And then as you continue to mature and develop people, it is nice to allow them, put them on stage while you're sitting back there watching. And really, you kind of at times admire them. I was talking to a previous colleague back from my days in Charlotte. I was talking to her a couple weeks ago, and she said to me, and she just got a really nice promotion. And she said, you were the person that believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And here, 10 years later, she's now a senior executive with one of the largest healthcare systems in the country and successful healthcare systems. And that really touches the heart when people say things like that to you, because then you had an impact on a person, and that person was able to contribute more than what they had in the past. And to me, that's kind of one of the ultimate goals of being a leader.
That's great. That's very good stuff. I totally agree with that. When you talk about areas you might want to see people that have high aspirations improve in, I'm thinking that not public speaking is the wrong term, but presenting to a small group would be important. That's a tough skill not everyone has. So I suppose if you're going to rise, if you want to be at a certain level, you're going to have to present information to operational people. And you're going to have to speak
Yeah.
beyond the IT suite. That's right, right? That's an important distinction. It's one thing working within the IT department and presenting to IT people, but it's quite another to present to the chief medical officer or the board or things like that. So that to me is probably, again, if you have those higher aspirations, that's something you're going to have to do. The other area that I thought is very distinct and needs to be studied and would not come naturally to a technologist. And we're sort of focusing here on people that have come up through the traditional technology route, infrastructure, that kind of thing, rather than a clinical side, finance and budgeting and MBA type stuff. So, you want to take those real quick, sort of that presenting and then understanding the numbers of running a department and budgeting seem to me, again, important skills you want to get straight on.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because that whole piece of, kind of seek first to understand is really important when you're presenting. You have to understand the content, obviously, but you have to understand the audience. You have to be able to read the room. And a lot of that comes from listening to what is happening in the room before you're speaking so that you can really come back with opportunities or challenges or commentary that can be received by those in the audience. So when people say they've communicated something, that's only half of communication. There's the sender and the receiver. And if the receiver doesn't get it, to one of your first points, because we're using tech terms or acronyms or trying to speak, like we're talking to ourselves, we're going to lose the room. When you do that, you really have to speak in terms of value creation, the business side, the clinical, the experience, the efficiencies, how effective it is, how quality is being improved. Those are all the reasons why we're doing anything that we're doing on the technology side. So you got to understand that whole business piece that gets into on the finance side as well. So there is a an easy way to get things approved, but not hold people accountable afterwards. So we set up a governance structure a couple months after I came on board, and that governance structure has approvals for things at certain levels. So there's 50 some odd work groups in the IT governance component. There's four steering committees. They have certain levels of authority. And then there's the joint IT governance that sits on top. And that's mostly the senior team that is at that level. Things that go to that level for approval, we are going to do retrospective reviews on it. So every one of those projects or initiatives that got approved, we're going to come back 6 months after the go live and come back and say, hey, this is what was sold. when you presented the case, how do you come back now? And did we achieve or overachieve or underachieve the results? And that's where the learning comes in to say, hey, maybe we thought this was going to happen. It didn't happen. Why did we misread the information? Or because these are all investments, and we have to compete the technology investments with investing in our providers and our team members, and looking at buying or building new facilities, new relationships. Those are all take investments, and IT is an investment, so it has to have some kind of return, whether it's efficiency, effectiveness, experience, and that kind of flows to the budget side. So now we're moving to the next level of accountability where things starting July 1st on forward are being presented. You actually have to put in the GL accounts that are going to be impacted by that initiative, and we're going to go ahead and send that to finance so that they can forecast or reforecast pending upon where those costs are and where those benefits are going to be achieved, specifically by line item. And so again, just kind of evolving over the first year to a level where accountability is going to be there for all of us that are presenting investments for the corporation. And that is a piece that over time people will learn, because no different. It's kind of like the parent and professional parent. You kind of have to manage within your own budget, within your own means at home. So why don't you do that here at work? So to be able to teach people to be able to be as astute on the finance side as they are at home, that's an important part of the leadership piece.
What about that CIO, or whatever title we want to use, the head of IT relationship with the CFO? What's your advice around that and making sure that that's solid?
Well, relationships, that is the key, I think, for any type of leadership role. Is you got to have relationships. It's not all about the numbers, but really getting people to understand and building a level of trust that there's a high level of not only accountability, but hopefully the probability that that's going to be successful. And so the CFO, the CEO, Chief Clinical Officer, Chief Transformation Officer, those are all really strong relationships you have to have across and build that trust across the whole team. And the CFO in particular, because he or she does have the actual books of what they're being responsible for. It's important to have that, but I can't say it's any more important than any of the other members of the C-suite. We're all kind of sit there as equals and value the input and the experience that everybody has. But at the finance piece, you find that in people's personal lives. I was just talking to my wife the other day about how that is not taught as you go through early part of education. When you get out of high school and sometimes out of college, you don't have that skill, and you have to learn it the hard way at times. And it'd really be important to make sure that we can develop our leaders to have that skill, so when they become responsible for that financial component, that they have good education and good experience and mentors or others that they can go to when they have any questions or any other comments that need to be answered.
That makes me think of the hard ROI, soft ROI. We see a lot around things like ambient listening. I mean, it, it's hard to argue with the value of ambient listening in terms of what you hear the users say. Usually all the comments seem to be positive. Some are over the top positive about physician quality of life improvement, but I believe the licenses are quite expensive. There's a whole, I was just going to talk a little bit about this and then you jump in where you want. So, again, you got hard ROI, you got soft ROI. Soft ROI is associated with some things that seem to have some very high value today. Um, I know you're an Epic shop. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with Epic. I want to ask you, um, how big of a focus of yours is optimization of the Epic suite, which could probably be done forever until the end of time because it's such a big suite, right? You could focus on that in and of itself. Um, when we talk about some of these ambient AI tools, the dynamic there is Epic was sort of late to the game on this, and you had a number of niche solutions come out that many have gone with. Now Epic's in the game, and you're seeing people either take it up for the first time or more likely transition over from one of the niche players, which is a very common sort of dynamic around Epic stuff over the last 10 years and probably going forward. but you've got your challenges there around integration. Most people like to stay in suite where they can, and that's what they do. They go niche when they have to, and they transition over when they can. Although you are disrupting the users who've gotten used to something. Lots of issues there. I guess you could start with the soft ROI, hard ROI, and then go into that niche versus staying in suite, and then we could go from there into Epic Agent Factory and token usage. So there's a lot there.
Well, let's talk about the ROI components because one of our objectives, one of our key objectives, is defined by the senior team and continue to be impressed on by our chief clinical executive, is truly unburdening the provider. So whether that's the physician or the nurse or other caregivers or team members, how can we unburden them? And that, in many cases, kind of gets to the soft part of it. And it's just equally as important as the hard ROI. I think over the years, we've all kind of said we only count on hard and the soft ROI, it is what it is, but we'll put it as a footnote, but it's not really part of why we do things. I think it has certainly risen to be sometimes equal to the hard ROI component. The hard ROI, certainly there's direct accountability for that. But on the soft side, to be able to make sure that we're changing some of the experience that people have and we're getting them to focus on things that they aspire to do or as part of their role. And I think that's an important piece for to unburden some of the things that we've done to providers. And I say we, it's the industry and some of the regulations that we have and some of the tools that we provide them, how we can make them better, faster, and easier for them so that they can either have a better quality of life after work or at least have more of a balance when they're actually in the office of things that are going to have more of a direct output versus those that would be indirect. So I think that's a whole component that is extremely important and one that we stress in a lot of our work and start to document. It's almost becoming a requirement that we have to understand. Are we adding something to the list for people to do, or are we taking some of those things away? So when you look at the ambient piece, I think there are certainly some hard ROI components, but we have, I think, quickly as an industry said, but there's some important soft ones about unburdening the provider and making things easier for him or her to practice medicine and or to deliver care. And so that to me is an important piece of it. I think in terms of the in-suite versus the niche versus creating something on your own, those are kind of the three channels. And I think as many of us have learned in our personal lives. Again, I think there's a lot of crossover between personal and professional. As many of us learned in our personal life, it's much more effective to have that GPS embedded in your car versus having, the add-on kind of stuck on your windshield. When somebody calls you on the phone, it takes your radio and brings it down, and the commands are less intrusive. Where if it's sitting on, the dashboard and it's separate, it's not, and it's really harder to balance. And professionally, it's the same way. So things that are in suite that that do well, that do the job fairly well, it's important that those that you take those in and not do something on your own or do something with a partner. But when there is value in between what the in suite is versus what a niche partner would have, if that is a measurable and meaningful value, then you have to be able to present that to the team or to your governance structure for approval because there is a delta. And that value may not be as much as going from zero, but to go from a 7 to a 10 might have some material impact. And so we got to make sure that we do take a look at that. And then things that are, what I would say, fully differentiators, things that we want to create that do create a competitive advantage, then we'll go ahead and make that. We'll go ahead and create that ourselves until the market catches up with it. And that's becoming less and less. And so you are seeing a transition over time, but you have to have the innovation pieces. The foundation is your base and the innovation sits on top of it. Some of that will come from some of your major platforms that you've purchased, and that's the reason why you purchase those platforms. And then some will be unique. And I think those are pieces that you got to keep an eye on because the platforms, aren't going to differentiate you from others in the market, but it will be those niche players or things that you make on your own that will differentiate you. I think the other piece I would add, and because you mentioned optimization, once you get a fully optimized foundational platform in place, then those other components can make a difference. But if you're still sub-optimizing where you're at, then you've got to be able to focus on that, if not first, certainly in parallel with the other work.
All right, very good. You mentioned the dynamic of deciding on whether or not you're going to go with an outside tool, weighing functionality against cost benefit and all that type of thing. I assume that's not the kind of thing that you're deciding. You're not making those decisions. It's got to go into some kind of governance, right? Where, but you can't. It can't all be. And I wonder. You tell me what this looks like because you have different factors that are weighing in: integration, total cost of ownership, cybersecurity, all this kind of stuff. It's not just pure user satisfaction, although they might not realize what the satisfaction will be like if it's not a fully integrated with the rest of their workflow. So it's just very interesting. There's how does that work in governance where you're ultimately coming up with a decision where there's that gray area? Well, and then there's the timing. Epic has it, or Epic's going to have it, or it's on the roadmap. So maybe we do a thing, but we're going to do a short contract. But if we do a short contract, the price goes up. It's all kinds of stuff swirling around. And I wonder how much of that is going to get formalized in a decision-making process, and how much of that someone just has to decide.
Yeah, that's the intent of the governance structure that we put in place. So it's not that IT said no, or IT said yes, or Craig said yes, or Craig said no. That's not the intent, because again, I have one lens. I try to look through at things with multiple lenses, but I don't live that every day. And that's why we have the governance place, so that we have, the transformation officer, the clinical officer, the financial officer, all the other pieces of the C-suite sitting at that top level of governance, so that they can come at and look at things from their side, because workflow is extremely important and the integration you talked about is important. In the past, it's been implementing systems. Today, it's all about integration and innovation. So those systems don't act independently anymore. They cross with each other. The new entrants coming into the market, sit on top of or are integrated with. You don't see the silos that maybe you saw, a decade ago. That's has all gone away. Those aren't players anymore if they can't integrate as part of your complete ecosystem. And that's why you got to have those different lenses come in, and why you have to have the governance in place. So it's not the CDIO making the decision. It's the organization that makes the decision, that prioritizes X versus Y, or that says this needs to be put on hold, or this is a definite no, it's not in our strategy. So we're just go ahead and put that on the side. There's no shortage of good ideas or great ideas. It's trying to find the right structure where you can pick the greatest of the great, that has the highest probability for success, so that those can be implemented within your organization. We're going through a refuel process now, and on the refuel process, my numbers might be off by a couple, but I think you'll get the gist of it. There were 212 different projects that are part of our refuel component. Of those, 187 are going to be in scope of that. So out of the universe of probabilities, we're going to be taking 90% of those and bringing those within the healthcare system. And now we have to prioritize within those. So there's 187 great ideas. Now, which of those are the greatest of the great? And so you start creating your matrix, your own magic quadrant, or whatever metrics you want to use, so that you can focus on the things in the top right quadrant that have a high probability of success, that may be short with, some may be long, but these are the metrics that we want to move. And each one of those have metrics defined, whether it's, an Epic system is moving the honor roll note, or the number of gold stars that you have, or whether it's one of the executive packet metrics are going to be moved. We're going to move from this quartile to this quartile by implementing this project. Because again, now you're into the sub investments in place. So we already have, the refuel investment, but now which pieces are going to fit within there, which are not, that are going to be moved to be, afterwards, and may never get done at all, with other priorities and changes coming into play. So that's where the governance, so all those 50 plus work groups prioritize that. They were all assigned those projects, went up to their steering committees. There's 4 steering committees, as I mentioned. And then we just approved last week all that's going to be in scope. And now we're doing the road mapping, laying it all out of dependencies and quick wins and capabilities, because it's not just about, the IT ability to do the work. That's the easy part. It really is about the customer's ability to have the change and the different things that they have going on and the maturity of their department. And like I mentioned before, the integration of a lot of these workflows. It may be great for you, but it may be a step backwards for me, or maybe not be as important as something else for me. But I have to do it because for the system overall, it ranked higher. And so there'll
Hmm.
be other components that will feed into that prioritization piece. So it gets kind of complex, but it's a simpler way of making sure you're focusing on the right things.
All right, very good. One of the dynamics that I've observed, I'll call it the rise of the physician builder. A lot of this is around Epic. You have these physicians out there that are pretty amazing in their understanding of Epic. They're CMIO types, informaticists, they're builders. I mean, that's the term fits. Um, and they seem to be sort of growing in influence and growing in importance. And I wonder, as someone who sits at your level, the CIO type level, what your thoughts are on, I think that if possible, you'd want to empower these folks to be as creative as possible with the AI tools that are out there, working within Epic, the Epic Agent Factory, agentic AI. They've got great ideas and they're very creative. Um, I did an interview recently where a very interesting concept came up of he said you really got to watch your token usage here, which makes me think of cloud and some of the dynamics that people ran into with cloud about, everyone excited and going to the cloud, and all of a sudden people started getting some bills that were a little out of control because it's tied to sort of use, which I think we're finding around the agent factory and token usage. So, any sort of thoughts there on that kind of dynamic?
Yeah, that whole consumption base is an important piece, and that's when that business case that you're developing, you'd like to hope that the more you use, the more your return is as well. And so that's the reason why you kind of have that in play to allow you to be able to, um, kind of invest more time, more energy in a lot of these build components so that you can get a better, a bigger and better return on the back end and continue to move down that. When you find that you're at that point of diminishing returns, and you really got to hope you have the right monitoring and maintenance in place to be able to say, hey, now it's time to kind of stop that. Now, I mentioned our IT governance, but let me now also mention our AI governance. So that got stood up in December of this past year. The first couple of meetings were very administrative in nature. Now we get into the actual application of using our AI governance, and it's really an advisory committee that feeds into the IT governance. So we'll have an intake process, or we do have an intake process where new ideas and new partners, new solutions, all kind of will come through the intake process. There'll be an evaluation, and as long as it fits within the guardrails, then those are things that we want to move forward with. Then they'll go into the prioritization along with all the other investments that we'll have in play. And then there's an education component, and then the other work group is really the maintenance and the monitoring of it, so that everything that goes into play, we'll be able to understand the continuous cost and the investment that we're making into that initiative, plus also the return that's happening in play as well, and making sure that what we intend to impact continues to be impacted. And if drift or something else occurs, we can catch that right away and allow ourselves to be able to revisit and to improve and get us back to where we need to be, or at some point replace with something else that now has a better opportunity to achieve or overachieve the expectations. So it's going to be a continuous flow of
Hmm.
things, monitoring it on a regular basis, and having the right tool in place to allow you to be able to do that from the intake all the way to when it gets sunsetted or replaced, in the future. But we hope those have big impacts, measurable impacts, things that we are able to then feed back on a regular basis to the team, that the senior team, our board, our communities that these are some of the advancements that we're making. You have health that will impact the efficiency of our work, how effective our work is, and the experience that our patients and our providers have.
Now you have cybersecurity too, right?
I do, yes.
Yeah. Did you have a CISO or is that in the
I
works?
do have a CISO.
Okay.
Yep, super.
All right. So you're good there. You're good there. I mean, the biggest thing you see there is sort of agents, concern around agents. You know, do we know what's spun up already? Do we have some control over what's being spun up? And then I've seen stuff come out from analysts, like organizations like Gartner, talking about this is a big issue. You got to get your arms around it. Almost like you have to approach it a little bit like you're when you're giving permissions to your human employees. They should get the minimum they're supposed to get, and they should be revoked when they don't need them anymore. You don't want that. So it's an identity management play, right? But now you're doing it with agents. Any high level thoughts there?
Yeah, the shadow work, and this kind of gets back a little bit to some of your ability with you talked about physician builders and other assets within the organization that continue to evolve and use the tools better. That's why we're putting together, those kinds of policies and procedures and be able to maintain and monitor what's happening because we want to not be strict with yeses or nos, but say, hey, play within these rules, play within the sandbox that we've created and let's go ahead and continue to open up as much as possible to allow people to excel, in what their passion is and be able to impact the work effectively. So that's what we're developing. So again, it's not really the IT people being the limiting factor. We don't have enough capability. We can always find that, but if we have capability within the organization, let's bring that shadow to light so that it's documented. And if we're going to go ahead and decentralize some of that work, let's just make sure that people are following the rules of the road or the rules of engagement that we've set up. And then let's manage, maintain, and pull those benefits in play and hold people, accountable and be able to bring that stuff to light quicker and faster. I think that's the only way we're going to be able to do it. And that's a component of that education piece is to continue to get people to embrace, to become engaged with some of the newer things that are happening out there. And if there's a lot more self-help or self-development, self-work, let's bring that, again, within our approved engagement opportunities, bring them in and allow them to be able to do that kind of work and impact what they're doing or what others doing that's fully integrated with what we're doing as a health system. I think that's a great way to use the assets.
All right, very good, Craig. Just one more question, then I'm going to let you go. This has been a pleasure. I'd like to sort of bring out some of your experience from a career point of view. You've had a number of roles. We've spoken over the years. You spent a little bit of time outside of the provider side. You're back in. You see this a lot. People who've been on the provider side, they have an interim period where sometimes they're with a vendor, sometimes they're with a consultant, sometimes they stay, and that's sort of where they find their happiness or their happy place, or maybe not, whatever. They stay. Some of them come back. You came back. Um, I wonder if you have any advice for people trying to find their place, trying to, uh, they find themselves available. Let's put it that way. They're available. Maybe they wanted to be, maybe they didn't, and they have an opportunity to say, I could do a number of things. I could even
Hmm.
do something interim, but maybe my heart's in the provider side. I want to come back at some point, or maybe not. Any advice there, career advice on if you find yourself with a break, how do you figure out which way to go?
Yeah, that's several things that have happened to me later in my career. I really wish they would have happened earlier in my career, would have given me a better perspective on, relationships and partnerships and who's a vendor and who's a partner. I think it's important, as you in the first, I don't know, I say 10 years or the first, maybe you call it the first quarter of your career, is to make sure you do try some things out. Don't always stay, with a provider or with a certain provider or with a vendor or a certain vendor. Get enough where you can understand that it's there. If you believe that's going to be your passion long term, continue on. But if you find yourself where it's like, I have an opportunity now to do something different, give it a shot. You may just fall in love with it. But also, since the ecosystem that we have here within our industry is so tight, you will now know all the different parts of it. So whether you're with a payer or a provider, or whether you're with a consultant, or whether you're with a product company. Those are all different pieces that it's nice to know and have that experience. And so when you come and you're sitting at the table, when you're negotiating, or when you're looking to see what can we do together, or how can I help you and you help me, as a health system and as a provider to the health system, or a partner, it's really it's nice to be able to sit in that seat. So, when you're on the one side, sometimes I'm looked at as a target, right? I'm looked so when you stand the other side and you look at it, it's like, oh, you mean my seat was a target, and my friends are targets. It's a different way to look at it than you're looking at it as a set of peers. And now that you kind of have a little bit of that insight, it helps you understand. And you don't celebrate when you sign a contract. You celebrate on the provider side when the contract is at its end or in the midst of its process of being implemented, and you start seeing value and benefit
Right,
from it.
right.
Versus if you're, on the seller side, signing the contract's extremely important. For me, it's when the contract's over and I'm able to get the outcomes that we had both predicted to have happen when we came together and signed that relationship. So to have some of those kinds of insights or thoughts, or just know where other people's incentives are, helps you to be able to negotiate and make sure it's a win-win on both sides, because I don't think many of us want to work with vendors. We all want to work with partners where there's skin in the game, there's risk in the game. Want to make sure that things are mutually beneficial for all parties involved that are at stake with whatever that relationship is. So I think early in the career to be able to kind of move around a little bit will help you understand as your career develops and you find that passion for you. And as you know, it's happened to your point that with many people, then they've kind of jumped to one side or the other. They fell in love with that
Hmm.
at that time, and just continued on with it. But until you try, you don't really know. And so I think it's important to have that. I just think being committed to the industry and being committed to the communities and the patients, the outcomes that we want to have for our family and for our loved ones, whether no matter what role you are playing in that uh, healthcare technology ecosystem, that if we have that same vision toward the end, it would be certainly beneficial for all of us.
All right, Craig, that was absolutely wonderful chat. Great advice there. People should listen to this and they will learn a lot. So, always good to talk to you, my friend, and hope we can catch up down the road.
Thank you, Anthony.
Have a great day.
You too.